So this is a 10A spreader I just brought in the shop, and it might be a nice idea to go through and tell you what I look for if I'm at a sale and I'm looking at a spreader. Um, it kind of gives you the general gist of what to look for in a 10A. The first thing I would start with would be the front end, and so if you do this, you definitely have some play there this way. And so that can be in this casting, it could be in the bushings in the wheel, it could be in the spindles of the wheel are worn, it could be all three. And you're not really going to know until you take it apart. But you can plan on spending some money there. And the next place we look right here. So there's a pretty good 1/4 inch gap there. And that's going to be pretty hard to recover without replacing those, pulling those in, heating them, straightening them back out, and doing whatever it takes to make that nice and tight. Next we look at the hitch. So the hitch, obviously you got a problem there. So I normally replace this plate, and then I rebuild this hitch, and that generally does a good job of it. We're missing a seat bracket, so that's something to consider whenever you're doing a spreader. And then we come back to this piece right here. So when you take it out of gear, this arm right here lifts up, and so you kind of look at that play. Now if it's earmarked to rebuild, it's not a big deal because that gets a new pin anyway, and I rebuild the holes. But what happens is whenever there's slop here, this can be over here and it will not drop the chain down on your sprocket well. The next thing we look at is this wheel. So this wheel has some issues. Here's a rust hole, here's a rust hole, here's a rust hole. So we're going to need a new wheel there, and that's pretty big money, and actually you have to find them. They're actually fairly hard to find at the moment. So we know we need at least one wheel. Chains, if it's a rebuild, I'll put all new chains on, so there's no need to worry about it. If I'm trying to save money, or if I'm doing it for a customer and he wants to save money, I can compare a new chain to that one and see how much wear is there. The problem is how much wear is too much wear. So now here's a red flag here. So this chain is not even run on the sprocket. So that's a farmer fix. They made that as tight as possible and still being able to get on the sprocket. So there's a reason. It probably kept falling off because there's too much play or something like that. I'm just not sure what the reasoning is at the moment. So the next thing we look at here, we have bolts that came through the side. So we know the wood is questionable right here. We have undersized bolts here, which means someone's worked on it. There is a big problem. So if you kind of see someone's welded a plate here, you'll see the wood is separated because it's broken right there. So this whole rear end is sagged down. That's another reason this chain is so tight, because that chain is basically what's holding up this rear end. The next thing we look at is cylinder bars. If the cylinder bars are good, that's fantastic. If the cylinder bars are bad, that can be $150, $175, and that's if you can get them at your door. It's kind of they're expensive and they're expensive to ship. Next we look at these castings. I have bought these spreaders already just to get these castings, and I have bought these spreaders already that the guy told me everything's okay, and I get them here and I give him pretty good money for a junk spreader, and the castings are both broken. I'm not blaming the guy, but that's one of the reasons I bought the spreader for a high dollar. So the next thing we look at is widespread. I believe someone's replaced this shaft at one time. Obviously we have 3 paddles there that aren't in the right position for some reason. I mean, 2 of them might, but one of them's wrong, or one of them might be right, 2 of them are wrong. The next thing we look at is this bearing. So someone's welded this bearing, and the bearing on the shaft might be okay, but the problem is the bearing has to fit nice in this hole, and so that's gonna have to be replaced. And if that side needs replaced, more than likely this side needs replaced. And let's go back over here to these shields. So shields, again, shields are something you don't think are a big deal until you start buying shields. And You know, you can get $150, $175 in shields. Now these shields aren't bad. There's a couple cracks, something like that, but I that's not going to keep it from doing its job. So this side, I would say you can probably reuse. Obviously here you have a problem. And here, if you look at this, this kind of goes up and then back. And again, I think you're going to find that's all due to that broken angle iron down there. That whole spreader wanted to drop down, and the strain, it just couldn't handle it, so it bent that bar back. So now let's come over to this side. So this side, we have a shield. It's probably going to need replaced, and that's an expensive shield. We have a shield missing here. We have a shield missing there. Now all those together, that's about $100 and some on this side just for shields. Okay. So the red flag over here is, number one, the shaft isn't at the end of that sprocket. So that could mean, number one, the whole shaft just slid to the left. Someone's obviously worked on the spreader, first of all. So someone might have put a shaft in there that was short. It's very hard to say. And here we have a dog. That's kind of not normal. Again, if it's rebuilt, I replace those anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But here we got a fiberglass shield, and on the other side we have a fiberglass shield. Fiberglass shields, fiberglass paddles were big probably 30 years ago, before you had a lot of access or any access to these shields. Someone was making fiberglass, and the theory was, you know, they didn't rust. But the problem is they couldn't take the stress of the manure spreader. So now here's another thing. If you're a sail and you shake this here, that is right there. When I shake it, I'm kind of shaking from front to middle of the spreader. You know, you can kind of see where the shake stops, kind of in the middle. Now, at times, if you shake this and your shake stops right here, that probably means for sure your angle iron is bad and broken. Even later than it's broken over there. So farther back is typically where they break. Up there where that one's broken, that's kind of odd, kind of rare. So it is something to watch for. The next thing we want to look at, this wheel is not an original 10A wheel, so it's an 8 wheel. So that's 2 wheels I need, and if I had to buy them somewhere, and especially if I had to buy them new, which I probably won't. I don't know what new ones are. I imagine they're well over $200 now. So you have $400, plus you have to find the hubs at another $150. You can have $500-600 in 2 wheels. So right now what we're looking at is we're looking at all new wood. Here's another thing. Again, your wood can look fantastic, but what happens is, and these rivet heads aren't good ones to show you, but those rivet heads look really good. Okay. So I've seen spreaders where there are no rivet heads. So the only thing that's holding that wood on really is muscle memory. You know, the memory of the wood is what's holding that on. You'll especially see it on the floor. You won't see any rivet heads at all. All you'll see is kind of a rusted out hole where the rivet head used to be. And you know, again, a 10A spreader uses a wood for structural stability. A lot of people want to use plastic in their spreaders, and you can't do that in a new idea manure spreader. In fact, the plastic wood actually has a tag on it that says no structural stability or no structural element to it at all. And a new idea manure spreader uses the wood. It uses the wood to support this whole rear end here. So if that wood wasn't there, the only thing holding this up is this little piece of angle iron down here. So with that wood there, now you have about 18 inches of wood helping to support this rear end. And think about it, as these paddles go around, that, you know, they want to wiggle and they want to shake, and they you know, they want to do all this and they want to do all that. So you really need good wood. So never use plastic. And I tell people not to use pressure treated, just because the chemicals in pressure treated now supposedly should not come against metal. So that means special fasteners. In theory, you know, you shouldn't have it contacting your frame or anything like that. Here's an interesting thing right here. If you can see it, these cylinder bars actually came across, and every time they came around, they hit this shield until eventually it wore that shield away. And there's about a 1/4 inch deep groove in that wood where these cylinder bars just kept hitting and hitting and rubbing and rubbing. And again, I don't know if you can see it because of my poor lighting, but down there without the snow, you can see the bottom board is really bad. So yeah, I would have liked to say this wood could stay, but the wood's got to go. The wood has to go for sure. And then typically once you take the wood off, you see other stuff that has to be fixed, and there's no sense not to fix it. The apron chain, I think I'll wait to make that judgment, but if I was to make a real snap judgment, I'm going to say the apron chain is probably not reusable in a quality manure spreader. If someone wants something kind of cheap, that's a little different story. But this is not going to end up being a cheap manure spreader. Here's one indication. Again, because of the lighting, I'm not sure if you can see it. But there you can see how that link is kind of not even with that link, meaning there's slop this way. That's not typical. It's not atypical, but it's not really typical. But that kind of gives you an indication of the wear on the chain. Here's what I'm talking about the rivet heads. So, there's a rivet head down to half its size. There's one down to half its size. There's one down to half its size. So they're not all gone, but there's nothing left there to hold a board. In fact, that's typical for a manure spreader that needs rewooded. So yeah, that's how I would assess this new idea. So I think it's probably gonna get not a total rebuild. Like, I can reuse the paddles. The paddles in the back are fairly new. The shaft is fairly new as long as it's cut right. I'll have to see once I get into the axle and so forth, but it's definitely getting new wood. It's definitely getting quite a bit of rebuild in the front end. And a lot of shops don't do that, and you can tell they don't do it. It's just good practice to do it right, rather than to make it look pretty and be done with it. The other thing to look at on a 10A, and this is something I've learned to look for, 10As have frame problems right where that bend is. You'll see them cracked there. You'll see them broken underneath here. Once you get the wood off, you may see them so paper thin. That one there is just now starting to get thin. And what happens is you have to reinforce that somehow, because there's a lot of stress strain right there. So yeah, that's what I would look for on a 10A manure spreader.